I'm Kevin Power, and this is SaskScapes, the podcast featuring stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. Welcome to the first podcast of SaskScapes Season 6. You know, at the time I launched SaskScapes in 2014, it was the only original podcast featuring stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. The fact that the podcast continues is because of the tremendous support of the nonprofit sector, and the fact that arts and culture organizations see the value in supporting the work they're doing in the province by telling their stories through the power of podcasting. So thanks to everyone who's been a part of the series so far, and here's to a whole lot more. Okay, as this season launches, the world is in a really complicated place. We're over 16 weeks into a global pandemic, and our lives have been turned upside down from an economic, social, and health perspective. We've been social isolating to slow down and hopefully end the spread of COVID-19. So I think there's a thirst for good news stories, and so that's what this episode is. The Canadian television industry has always had a history of producing world-class programming. And in 1995, a local television station in Yorkton produced what would become a Canadian and U.S. success story with children's programming. CTV's affiliate station, CICC, produced an original children's program called Poetree and Friends. Poetree was a 6-foot-tall talking tree who spoke in poems. So my guests for this episode are the three artists and storytellers who were the on-screen talent. Poetree and Friends became an award-winning series which would eventually become a national success story. And by the way, CICC still operates as a semi-satellite of CKCK Regina. So climb on up and find a seat on one of Poetree's branches and listen to the story of how it all began.
Gather round the poetry story time. Again, and now it's time for Poetry and Friends.
Well, first of all, what I'd like to say is my three guests have the dubious distinction, for better or for worse, of being my first podcast pandemic guests. Clearly, this is being recorded remotely, and any listener will be well acquainted already with all of these various Zoom and Skype and conference call interviews and conversations. So we're just one more of them. So forgive us if there's any kind of technical glitches that you may hear. It's just all part and parcel of chatting during a pandemic. So first of all, I would like to say hello to Debbie, Joyce, and Dan. So let's start with Debbie. Debbie, introduce yourself and tell me where you're from.
I'm Debbie Hayward, and I'm from Yorkton, Saskatchewan.
Joyce Bagley from Yorkton, Saskatchewan.
Dan Califf. I live in Yorkton, but I'm an import from the States originally, so that's kind of a strike against me.
Not at all. In fact, we're glad you made it here before they closed the border down.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So this television show is the topic of our conversation. What I would like to ask you all first is, how did you all know each other? Was it just because you all live in town? How did you come together, I should say, on this particular project?
Well, I could start. Joyce and I were blessed to be able to work together at CTV. so our desks were side by side, and so we knew each other from there, but also we knew each other through the writing group here in town, and we were very lucky to not only be co-workers, but good friends as well.
Yep.
Debbie and I were both continuity writers at the TV station.
And Dan, I kind of know the answer to this question, but the listeners don't. So tell me a bit about your background and your main position in Yorkton for many, many years.
Well, for years I was the head librarian at the Yorkton Public Library, but I was also the de facto children's librarian, and so I did most of the children's work and actually probably got to know both the ladies because they were regular library users. But also I can't remember if I actually had a regular radio spot every week at the station or the TV, but I was over there quite a bit anyway, and that's sort of how I initially got involved. Was Greg Popowich, who was the brain behind the show, I guess, one day asked me, did I know anybody who would like to get involved with a kids show? And I glibly said, oh, how about me? And then I didn't hear any song for about 6 months, and I thought either he forgot about it or picked someone else or something. And then finally he called and said, come on, we're going to get going. So that's how I got involved.
Oh, the harsh world of entertainment. They ask you, and then you don't hear from them for months and months and months.
Yeah.
Well, so we love our libraries, first of all. And so I'm guessing you did a lot of programming with the library there, and hence the way you got the name Dan the Storyman.
Yes, that's right. That's why everybody in town knows who I am.
Okay, well, you've already answered one of my next questions. Who was the brains behind the show, which I should say is called Poetree and Friends? And Poetree and Friends ran out of Yorkton from 1995 to 2000 at the local Yorkton television station, which was and is CICC, which is part of the CTV network and is now a semi-satellite of CKCK out of Regina. So Greg was the brains behind this Poetry and Friends idea. He approached Dan. Now, Debbie, when did you get brought in on this?
Well, I think after when Greg first had the idea for a show about a talking tree and a little bird that lived in the tree, he approached management. I don't really know the order of how long it was before he spoke to Dan, but he approached management and asked about that, and they agreed that that's to go ahead with that project. So then Greg approached Joyce and I and asked if we would like to work on it, and it sounded like a great fun, something different for us to work on besides our regular work. And so we both said yes, and the rest is history, I think, isn't it, Joyce?
Yes, that's exactly how it happened. They needed writers for the show. It's one thing to have the idea, but then you have to write it.
So, Joyce, don't be modest, but a few days ago when we spoke, you told me about a rather prestigious literary award that you won.
Oh, my children's poems won in the Saskatchewan Writers Guild one year.
Well, that's pretty great.
It's wonderful.
Now, did that happen before Poetry and Friends was created?
No, it was the children's poems, and I never wrote children's poems until Poetry and Friends.
So it was a result of the show.
Yes, because I didn't write children's poems. I only wrote adult poems up until that time.
Okay, so you were both asked to be part of the writing team, but at that time when you were asked, did you also know that you were going to be on camera?
Well, I guess, I can't remember now, but I think they were sort of looking for a person to play Birdie, and I don't know whether I said something in a voice that I thought was the way Birdie would speak, and I sort of had a little audition. Dan, were you there at the time? Do you remember that? Were you reading a story, and I was sort of playing the part of Birdie? But anyway, once we did that, it just fell into place that I would be Birdie, so that just was the way it was for the rest of the show.
Now, did Birdie physically exist at that time?
No, he didn't. So he was.
Who decided that it was going to be a bird, and who made Birdie?
Greg's idea originally was to have a bird live in Poetree's branches, but I was the one who made Birdie, and he's a very cheerful-looking little fellow.
Multiple birdies.
Yes, that's right.
Why were there multiple? Birdie had understudies?
Birdie had an understudy because he was involved in so many various adventures that after a while his adventures started to catch up with him and he'd lose feathers and look a little worn. So I made another Birdie just in case.
Well, television.
He was the understudy Birdie.
Television is known for causing many a breakdown, so physically or mentally. So there you go. Now, Joyce, tell me about the tree. I mean, the tree is the premise of this whole show, and you provided the poems that the tree said each episode, correct? So the tree was probably the first character to be created, I would expect.
Yes, we made the tree too. We went back there to the 10-foot tree made out of paper mache with a moving face. The face was a rubber type of thing. I was not on camera, but I was inside that tree moving the eyes.
Oh, that was you.
When the show was being produced. That was me moving the eyes. There were two of us inside the tree.
But that was not your voice.
No, it was Jim Brock. Yes.
I guess there were three of us actually in the tree, weren't there? Because you ran the eyes, and
yes,
Jim was in there.
Inside the tree.
Yes,
so and inside.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been crowded
you had to be in there to work Birdie.
That's right.
You must have been quite packed in that thing.
Oh yes, it was surprisingly roomy.
Yeah,
as far as trees go.
Small. Jim wasn't small.
And
No.
Dan, you were lucky because you got to sit on a limb of the tree away from all that madness.
Oh, yeah, I was, it was nice out there. Nice breeze all the time.
Dan was still in the madness, though, even though he was in the treehouse.
So,
because I had to deal with you, Birdie.
Boy, Birdie clearly is the central point of this entire show.
Yeah, she was the star. She quickly became the star.
Oh, not at all. No. No. Well, Birdie we were a team. You know, there was Birdie, Poetry, and Dan, and it was a great team.
You're being humble. Come on. Birdie was the diva.
No.
Yes.
So,
I don't know what he'd say, but
my question to any of you can feel free to talk to this. Which came first, the poetry and that inspired the script, or the script and that inspired the poetry?
I think probably the script came first, wouldn't you say, Joyce?
Yes, I would say so. I would say it was the script. I usually had some poems written, and we would put a poem in that fit either the script or the story that Dan was going to read.
That's right.
We'd try and fit it into the theme to some degree.
Right.
Yeah, it seems to me that we used to, especially at the beginning, we would just sort of decide, okay, what's our theme going to be, or what's the story going to be about? And once we decided that, then it would partly get written, but the script was pretty free-flowing, and then after that, Joyce would do the poems to go along with the story.
Right. Well, that actually takes me to my next question, which you can then take, Dan. How much of it on the day when the cameras were rolling, how much did you stick to the script, and how much was improv?
I think basically we would, we had sort of an outline, but I think it was pretty easy to ad lib, and maybe I'm remembering this not quite right, but it seems to me we often got off track, but it was easy to get back on. So I think we did quite a bit of that.
I'm guessing there were lots of retakes?
If there were, it was only because we burst out laughing about something and had to do it again.
Did that happen often?
Oh, sure.
Quite often,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But for Dan's part...
would have a script in the tree so she could follow the lines to some degree, but Dan wouldn't have a script, I don't think. He just answered her and ad-libbed.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess we had to stick to what we had written, to the big part of the show because everything was timed out, so we couldn't veer too far off. But with Dan not having a script in front of him, if the script was written a certain way for him to say a certain thing, it didn't matter if he said it in a different way, as long as he said the idea of it,
Sure.
So that's where the ad-lib part came in.
Right.
He was quick on the take-up with those.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I remember one episode, Bertie, where it might have been a Christmas thing, but remember you were plugging in some lights?
I think so.
Of course, disaster resulted. but anyway, I made some quip about when they first installed lights at Wrigley Field in Chicago, and of course the kids wouldn't have got that. But I figured maybe some of the adults will clue in on this.
Well, sure. I remember it now because we had a lot of fun. Even Dan's improvisations were sometimes we'd burst out laughing, and that would be a time when we'd need a retake.
Right. I noticed Dan...
And most of the retakes were for that.
For just cracking up. Dan, I noticed you call Debbie Birdie all the time. Debbie, have you just sort of taken on the nickname Birdie? Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, I guess so. Anyway, with the three of us, anytime Dan sees me anywhere, even to this day, he still says, Bertie, and Bertie says, Dan! In reply, it's just our standard greeting, isn't it, Dan?
Pretty much, I'll say.
So you're not accosted in the grocery store with people flooding around you saying, hey, Bertie?
Oh, no. Not at all.
I still call her Debbie. I call her Debbie.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, I want to get to some of my favorite characters. And I should say, for listeners, there actually is a YouTube video with some highlights of Poetree and Friends. And you can actually watch Bertie in action and Dan in action and Joyce manipulating the tree and the script, and basically you can see an entire show episode to get a great idea. So I already know that my favorite characters after watching it are the couch potatoes.
Yay!
Now, how did they come
We
about?
love the couch potatoes. Joyce, how did they come about? I think we just
were looking for something to do, I guess, and we decided to have couch potatoes. We just did that kind of thing at work otherwise, too, not just in this program, but that's how we kind of work, just by throwing ideas back and forth to each other.
That's right, and it was just great. And those couch potatoes, we had such fun doing them because they were the final result of whatever adventure they were on was always to eat chips.
Yes, I know.
So there was, Joyce and I were two of the constant potatoes. And then the third voice was, sometimes it was Greg, but sometimes it was whoever just happened to be free. But Joyce and I always operated the potatoes, didn't we, Joyce?
Yes. Yes, we always did the potatoes. And we always wrote the scripts. We would just go off somewhere and just throw lines back and forth until we got the script. Didn't take us long.
No.
Were they big puppets? They looked quite small, the couch potatoes.
They'd be, what would you say, maybe about 14 inches high, maybe 12 inches high?
Say a foot to 14 inches.
Oh.
Yeah. And you know, the interesting part is they're made out of pantyhose.
Ah, that's the material.
Yes.
They have a very unique look.
They do. And they have their own little unique personalities, too. You know, the number one potato was always kind of the one that was broaching the idea to the other potatoes of doing something. And number two potato was always kind of hanging back, not really sure if that crazy idea would work. And number three was sort of going in between, changing sides, whether to go ahead with the project or not. So they each had their own little personalities, didn't they, Joyce?
Yes, they did. Some didn't want to go on hikes, and some didn't want to have exercise, and they argued. And they did have a guest once. They had a sweet potato.
He was
right.
Yes, he's in the YouTube video. He's in the YouTube video, and he has a slight sort of Caribbean background.
Funny? I forgot. About that one.
I forget his name.
Yeah, I can't recall his name. But you all do dive into chips at the end of it. It's true.
Yes, that's right.
He's our guest that time.
You know, It occurs to me that during this pandemic, I'm sure you've probably heard that a lot of potatoes have been thrown out because the restaurants closed down and there has not been as big a need for French fries as there were. And I'm thinking it would be a great campaign to sort of reignite the enthusiasm for the humble potato by doing a series of commercials with the couch potatoes.
Oh, they would love it. They'd love it. They'd be quite offended if they knew potatoes were being thrown out.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Mountains of them. Have you seen the photos?
And I mean, those would be relatives of the couch potatoes. Their cousin Norland. Do you remember, Joyce? There was a cousin Norland.
Yes, yes.
Cousin Norland,
and
the
anybody
potato?
Yes, well, anybody who grows potatoes is a gardener. Norland is a popular variety of potato. Oh. So I think one time they did have cousin Norland. Ones. Yes.
They're kind of round red ones.
Yeah, very tasty.
And there was another character as well. I think I saw a dinosaur. Was it a dinosaur or a crocodile?
There was a dinosaur. Dreyfus was his name.
Dreyfus?
Dreyfus. You know, we'd create a new character. We'd say, oh, well, why don't we, make these bananas that could talk? So then quite often we ended up being their voices as well.
Did you really have talking bananas?
Yes, we did.
Oh, yes. The boggly bananas.
Yes.
I was just wondering, is that my memory is, again, fading fast, but it seems to me that the couch potatoes weren't introduced until later on. Like initially when the show started, they weren't part of it, and then they came in later, and that's when we added the exercise segments. I think maybe at the beginning, the craft section was always in there, I remember, and it may have been a little longer, and it seems to me our parts, where we interacted would have been longer than they were later on when they had the exercise segment.
Yeah, that could well be.
Couch potatoes weren't very long.
No,
that's true.
A couple of minutes?
Yeah.
A couple of minutes, probably. I have a script sitting in front of me, actually, and it looks like probably 2 minutes at the most.
Everything had to be timed right out, you see.
Right. So the exercise came in a little later along, and I was going to ask you about that. I wonder how they they came about doing a portion of the show with exercise and kids.
Well,
I probably thought children needed exercise.
Right?
Yes, and instead of sitting and watching TV all the time, maybe that was sort of a positive message to get the kids up and moving. Well, besides the couch potatoes and the boggly bananas, we had a lot of characters. We had Peas that came to visit once in a while, like Peas in a Pod, and we had Dreyfus the Dragon and Ned, who was a neighbor, and the Feathered Frenzies. Do you remember them, Joyce?
Oh, yes, those were good.
Tell me about the Frenzies?
The Frenzies. And they were frantic frenzies. They were very excitable birds that Birdie knew. There were 4 of them.
But whatever you did, you had to be very careful, as you say, with the timing, because you had 22 minutes to keep it maximum.
That's right. So even though,
timed,
everything was timed out, and sometimes we had to speed things up a little too if we weren't reaching our marks. So it did have to stick to a timetable in a certain way, but that's okay.
My notes tell me that there were 65 episodes in total. Does that sound about right?
Yes, I would say so. Probably 10 a year.
I feel tired. I feel tired thinking about it.
You sound like potato number 2 now, Joyce. He was always tired.
So how many episodes would you film in a week?
I think just one in a week, wouldn't we?
Yeah, just one a week.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Remember, we had to work otherwise.
No,
and Dan was working too.
Dan disagrees.
Yes.
No, I remember we used to do, often we would do 2 or 3 in a shooting. We would take, like a whole afternoon and do 3 shows, like our part, and then all the extra stuff like the potatoes and all that could be added in later. But the parts with Birdie and me in the tree we would often do 2 or 3 shows.
Okay.
Now, Joyce, you feel even more exhausted thinking about it.
No, it was worse. We're sitting at the desk than being in the tree. This was relaxing.
It was great fun.
I can't remember, ladies, but who took over for poetry? Like Judd, was it Judd somebody?
Judd Niven, yeah.
Judd Niven, yeah.
Yeah, okay, right.
So we only had 2 voices for poetry, Jim and then later on Judd. Yes.
I was going to ask you earlier, probably right from the top I should have asked you this, and maybe each of you can respond to it. I know that children's shows in the dark ages when I grew up were very important to my creative brain that I have now. What were some of the shows that you guys grew up with?
Well, I didn't have television till I was 13.
Oh.
So that tells you how old I am. And we did not have children's shows. I watched the first show coming out of Brandon TV, and it was mostly news, Ed Sullivan Show, that type of thing.
Uh-huh.
Probably, I guess, the variety of a show like Sesame Street was probably kind of in our minds too, to have different things going on for the kids. So maybe that was one that would be an influence.
There was one thing about that, though. We felt some children needed a little longer segments to encourage them to have a longer attention span. I can remember us talking about that.
Yes, I remember that.
You didn't need to jump from one thing to another. Children are capable of thinking long thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And following along with the story, when Dan would be reading, that's true. I do remember us talking about that.
While you were filming the show, were you known for being, well, people will be watching the show, so Dan, you would be recognized in the town. People already knew you, but then they knew you as this celebrity.
Yeah, that's quite amazing for me, actually, because, well, I was the only human on the show.
Right.
So, as I say, Birdie was the star, but I was, everybody in town, whether they came to the library or not, knew me. And so it was really strange when I moved away for about 12 years and then came back. People would say, "Oh, hi, Dan," and I'd look at them and I'd think, "I know I should know this person, but I can't remember who it is." and it's still like that. I mean, people come up to me all the time and say, "Oh, hi, Dan," and start yapping away, and "Oh yeah, I should know you, but sorry, I don't."
Well, Debbie and Joyce, did you live then in relative anonymity as far as the show was concerned, or did people know your part in it?
I don't think so. Do you feel that they knew us, Joyce?
No,
I don't think so.
They knew us.
No.
We did a few things at the library that Birdie came to as a guest, and I read poetry to children. So those few people that attended something like that would know, but that would be it.
Yeah.
Now, the show didn't just stay local. Eventually, what happened?
Well, amazingly to all of us, I think it got picked up by YTV, so then it was shown across Canada, and that was, I don't even know if we grasped how exciting that was at the time. It was hard to even believe.
Well, and then plus it went to the States on Nickelodeon.
Really?
Yeah, it was on Nickelodeon too.
Yeah, I actually have a story about that if I could digress again.
Please do.
When I was working here in Yorkton at the library, I had a bookseller friend who used to come up from Minnesota. And anyway, eventually at the end of my career, I worked down in Wisconsin again. And of course, got to know him when he was working down there. And he said he went fishing one weekend with his friends way up in northern Minnesota. And he stumbled out of the bedroom on Saturday morning and flipped on the TV. And there I was sitting up in the tree. And Dave said, I know him. And all his friends said, "Oh, come on, Dave, you just hung over." And he said, "No, I really do."
Isn't that cool?
Oh, wow.
That's great.
Well, did you guys know? Did you know that it was going to be picked up by YTV and then go to Nickelodeon, or did you just hear about it through the grapevine?
No, if we
I just heard about it by the grapevine.
Yes, me too.
If we'd known that, we wouldn't have signed our rights away. Would have made some money.
You'd have a treehouse in the Caribbean now, Dan.
Right.
Everything was hatched out just at Joyce's and my desk, and then we told Dan what adventures,
Dan and he'd get a book, and that would be it.
That's right, and away we'd go.
Yeah. Well, again, I have another little story.
Yep.
Just a couple of years ago, I went out with a friend on a little road trip around here, and we stopped at the Salt Coast pub, and I came in, and this quite attractive young blonde who was the bartendress came over and took our order, and then she kind of went away, and a few minutes later she came back and kind of looked at me, and finally she came up and said, "Are you Dan, the story man?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she got all excited, and after that there were free drinks for the rest of the time we were there.
Now that's a fan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And my notes tell me that the show actually won 5 Gold Can Pro awards.
Yes, that's right. That was very exciting.
What's amazing too there, I think, which you should be so proud of, is that, the quality, but also just the fact that you were able to do it with no staff.
Right.
That's right. And
right. There were so few of us and so little time devoted to it, really.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not like there were specific people that worked only on the show. Everybody else, we just, it was in addition to our regular work. So that really is an achievement.
That's fantastic. I mean, when I was approached with this story, I'm not originally from Saskatchewan, and I would have been far too old to be watching children's television shows from 1995 to 2000. But I dare say there's probably a lot of people in Saskatchewan who might not even be aware of the show.
That could be true, yes. If they weren't watching children's programming.
I mean, I'm just saying that because being in that industry, there's so little original content that we can stand up and be proud about that is being produced out of Saskatchewan and known across Canada and the U.S. I mean, of course, there's Corner Gas and shows like that, but I mean, something of children's programming, it's quite a feather in the cap of the province, I would think. All right, so this is a free-for-all now. You may all speak to this, but I want to hear about you've told me some of them, but I want to hear about some of the bloopers and the funnier moments and memories that you have during this excursion.
Oh. I just remember Bertie always, causing trouble in just about every episode, and that was often the way that scripts seemed to be written, that there would be a chance for things to go off the rail, and they always did.
Yes, Dan was always getting soaked or something thrown at him, or you're such a good sport, Dan. So it was good. I think it made children realize that you didn't have to do everything perfectly, too. You could make mistakes.
Yeah, we were good at that, yep.
I guess things went wrong, but we never thought of them as going wrong. It was just always a little twist in the adventure somehow. It never seemed like it was a big catastrophe. It was always just if some little, mistake happened, we either just redid it or we worked it in somehow so that it became part of what we wanted. It was never a calamity. It was always fun.
A lot of the times the scripts were written with disaster looming, because just about every show Bertie would cause trouble, and that was kind of standard fare.
Well, that's true.
That was the character.
Well, that's right, and that was the adventure. There was one episode I found a script for it, and it was where I forget if it's you or Bertie is having a garage sale. So Bertie finds all kinds of junk in his nest, and he puts it in the garage sale. And then, Dan, you ended up buying it. And when the garage sale was over, you were showing Bertie what you bought at this garage sale, and here it was all the stuff that he cleaned out of his nest. And it was so funny, because that's exactly the premise of every adventure is they'd start off on a normal little event, and it would turn into a big adventure for Dan and for Bertie and for Poetry. But that's what made it fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and I have this one about the magic crystal ball. I have that script here.
Oh, yeah.
And Bertie broke the ball in the end because he wouldn't leave it alone. So, I mean, that was how it was. Everybody was expected Bertie to make mistakes and be mischievous. That was it. It was mischievous.
That's it.
Well, you hung on to the scripts, so that you've got some memories there. You obviously wanted to hang on to some memories of the show.
I couldn't find too many.
I couldn't either, and I'm sorry that I just never even thought to make a copy for us, Joyce. I think we just made copies for everybody who needed one, but we didn't do it for ourselves. But I'm sorry now that we didn't, because looking back at them, I still laugh when I read them.
I know. I just happened to have a few that were in a folder that I'd brought home from work when I left work. And otherwise, they weren't even deliberately kept. They just were there.
Debbie and Joyce, how long did you stay at the station even after the show finished filming?
I left in 2012.
I left in 2002.
So you were there for a long time.
Yes.
This was your career.
Yes, it was. That's for sure. So we saw a lot of things come and go in that time, didn't we, Joyce?
Yes, we did.
There is an innocence to the show, and as you were saying earlier, feeling the need for children to have longer attention spans so that you would stay longer on one particular story or activity. And I know some of you probably have grandchildren, so maybe you get exposed to some of the programming they're watching, although everybody seems to have their heads buried in devices. But do you think there will always be that need for that age of innocence in children's television programming?
I hope so. I hope there is. I think maybe with this show, the innocence came because of, to me anyway, Dan and Joyce, you can tell me what you think. To me, the underlying theme of the show was always the friendship between Poetree and Bertie and Dan. And even when things went wrong with Bertie's adventures, Dan and Poetree were always still his friends and standing beside him and helping him sort things out. And to me, that was the innocence of this show, was that they were always friends. And that was the number one connection between them. What do you both think?
I believe they still like that innocence even now, because I have great-grandchildren, and the youngest boy likes Thomas the Train, and that's very slow-moving too. They have a message, not a message as far as you have to behave a certain way, but just something you can think about.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Enjoy having a chance to think. And I have young great-grandchildren who come here often, and I find that they like that.
Joyce, are you still writing?
No, I haven't been writing.
Oh.
That's a shame.
With those grandchildren.
It's because I'm so busy with those great-grandchildren that I don't have time to write.
Have you read them, any of your poems?
Yes, I've read a few of them to the children. More so to my grandchildren than to these great-grandchildren.
You have to start again because you have such a gift for that. Beautiful.
Oh, thanks, Debbie.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Another question I have for you. Where is Bertie and the tree and all of the other characters? Do they still exist? Joyce, Debbie, did you take Bertie home with you, or have they all gone to their great reward?
No, Bertie lives here, and the stand-in Bertie went with Dan. And sadly, I think Poetree has probably gone to that big forest in the sky, as far as I know.
Yes, I'm sorry to report that the stand-in Bertie is gone as well. We have lots of cats, and over the years they took care of Bertie.
Dan!
Sorry.
What a way for Bertie to go.
I know, yeah.
Bertie finally gets eaten by a cat.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
There has to be a poem in that.
There has
you go,
to be.
Joyce. Debbie, you've retired from the station and life has moved on. So tell me where Debbie, the children's television writer and performer, where are you at now in your life? What's going on for you now?
Oh, I'm blessed. I have a beautiful life. I'm busy all the time because you know how that goes. As soon as people know that you're not working, they say, "Oh, you can do this instead, and you can help us with this." But I'm still doing writing, and I'm just busy with my other interests, and I'm busy all the time. It's wonderful.
But you keep creative.
She does a wonderful.
I try to, yes.
Does a wonderful gardening column every week for the paper here.
Well, and gardening is one of my great interests, so it's fun for me.
Well, especially, I'm sure the couch potatoes had an influence on your love of gardening.
Oh, they probably do.
Tell me you have
garden.
Tell me you have potatoes growing.
We do, of course. Yes.
Dan, do you have potatoes? Debbie and I have potatoes. I have Norlands. Do you have Norlands, Debbie?
No, we have Kennebecks.
Oh,
that's
okay.
the cousin from down south.
Yes.
Well, I insist that you pull some of them and take photos of them and give them names.
Okay.
It'd be hard to eat them then if we named them.
That's right.
Well, it wasn't hard for the cat to eat Birdie, so I'm sure you can rise to the occasion.
I'm going to have nightmares now. Picturing poor Birdie, just a feather wafting through the air. Oh, my goodness. Dan!
Joyce, we thought you went missing at one point when we were trying to contact you, so I know that you have a busy life. What's going on for you now?
Well, busy with family. My husband is getting older and has had some health problems. My son lives with us. He has MS. And I have 3 great-grandchildren whose mother died, and so I take them as often as I can. And I do some church work, but of course recently we haven't been doing that because of the virus. I garden, I knit, I read, I do embroidery, and I do lots of things like that. Baking, cooking. That's me.
How about you, Dan?
No, probably compared with the ladies, I haven't been doing too much. For years, I was a very serious long-distance runner and continued that after I retired. But the last few years, I finally almost packed that in and started swimming regularly, which I used to do as a kid. So it was pretty easy to pick that up again. And so I've been swimming fairly seriously. But otherwise, I don't do too much, read and watch too much sports on TV.
Do you all see each other? I mean, pandemic aside, do you all see each other around town?
I have seen Dan once in a while around town. Debbie and Keith and George and I do get together once in a while, but because of George's ill health and the pandemic, we haven't done that before last fall.
No. Hopefully that will change.
Debbie, why do I remember you saying something about getting together for over lunch, over a half hour once a week for some kind of a storytelling or writing, or did I just make that up?
No. Joyce and I and another friend of ours who writes, we were sort of having monthly literary lunches, I guess you'd call them, where we'd write something and we'd bring it and we ate our sandwiches together, we'd share our writing. But as you know, Joyce would be busy sometimes and I'd be busy sometimes, or Kathleen would be busy sometimes. And then when the pandemic started, that whole thing sort of fell apart. But we were talking that maybe we'll try and do it by email or something, share our stories. So I hope that begins again, too, because those were really inspiring, weren't they, Joyce?
Yes, I enjoyed that. We need to do that again. But I do know that part of it was last fall when George was in hospital and so forth.
That's right. It just didn't work.
Time, and then the pandemic was on us, so it's just been one thing after another, really.
Well, that's right.
I think your story is wonderful, and I wish there was a way that you could be celebrated and brought out into the spotlight one more time to at least be recognized in Yorkton for this incredible accomplishment.
Well, thank you. Well, it's exciting for us to be here with you today. That's just wonderful.
Really. I think you should lead you should lead the next Yorkton parade if they have one.
Oh.
Oh my!
That's not gonna. Right. No parades, not yet.
Yeah, you can parade.
But you know, I don't know if Kevin, you know this, but Joyce wrote a special poem about our experience, and I think she's you could share it with us whenever you think it's ready.
You have it, Joyce?
Yes, I do.
Oh, fantastic. Please go ahead and read it.
Remembering Poetry and Friends. A tree, a bird, and a storyman came from imagination land. They welcomed a little dragon red and bananas that danced till they fell in bed. Crafts with things you have in your house. Poems about cowboys, cats, and a mouse. Couch potatoes who hadn't much zip. Their biggest chore was eating a chip. Closing the show was the hardest part because every segment stole your heart.
That's so sweet.
Beautiful.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
Was it a bittersweet final episode that you shot?
Oh, I think it probably was.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Joyce.
I think in this I just meant each show, when we're finished up and things we had to quit all the horsing around and get back to normal.
That's right.
Yeah, in the poem I think that's all it means, because we had such fun doing it that was kind of a release from our day-to-day work.
Mm-hmm.
This was not work.
No, and our imaginations could really go free, couldn't they?
Yes.
I think that's everybody's.
Nobody came in and said, I like it, but.
Right.
When we did a commercial, somebody might come and say, well, I sure like it, but. And then there'd be something you'd have to change in it.
That's very true.
I was going to say, I think one of the ultimate goals in life for most people is to be able to say, in my career, I did things that I loved so much, it didn't feel like work.
Well, I think we could say that about this.
We sure could.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hope you could, Dan.
Oh yeah. No, it's always fun to go and do the show.
And it's funny when we were starting to plan this conversation, and I dug out those few scripts that I had, and I showed them to my husband Keith, and he was reading them over, and he was just laughing out loud, thinking back on Bertie's adventures, because I'd come home at the end of the day and say, what Bertie was, well, of course he knew what Bertie was going to be up to, but when I told him about how the shooting went that day, he had a good laugh then, and he has a good laugh now reading them all over again. So that's nice that the humor can be sustained after all that time.
That's a credit to your writing.
Well,
yes, it is.
Well, all of ours. Joyce, your beautiful poems, and some of them still move me to tears. The ones that I've got copies here, they're just beautiful.
What a lovely trip down memory lane for the three of you.
It was. It sure was.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was really looking forward to this episode in particular because I'm so happy whenever I hear about a entertainment success story in the province.
Well, it was wonderful. Joyce, do you remember when we wrote the poem for the couch potatoes?
Oh, I loved that poem.
It probably took us, it just seemed the words just came. It was like magical. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, there it was.
I'm guessing you don't have the poem with you, Joyce.
Oh yes, but I didn't write this one just myself. We wrote it together.
We'll delegate it to Joyce to recite this poem.
Okay, that'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
Don't want to move, don't want to fuss. Be a couch potato with us. Relax all day, sleep all night, eating snacks. Hey, that's all right. Donuts, bars, pretzels, chips. We don't care if it goes to our hips. Shakes and burgers, cones and fries. All these goodies tantalize. Don't want to move, don't want to fuss. So bring some more snacks for us.
Did you do that from memory?
No, I've got it here.
Oh.
But I think we know it from memory even before I found these. I was sitting on the couch one evening. Keith and I were coincidentally eating chips, and all of a sudden I just recited the poem. It still came back just like yesterday. I don't know what that says.
Well, it's interesting though, because my oldest daughter, Sarah, she's early 40s now, and she can still rattle that off.
Good for her. Well, that's very nice to hear. Oh, that's great.
We've been living in a very challenging time and continue to do so, and there's not many feel-good stories out there on radio and television these days. Yay, the three of you, for providing with some sheer entertainment that doesn't end in bad news.
Oh, well, thank you so much for this opportunity. It was great for us all to get together. Yes, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. This episode is sponsored by the City of Yorkton. The theme music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born Canadian singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. Every effort was made to find the performer and composer of the Poetry and Friends television introduction theme. And as always, thanks to SaskCulture for your ongoing support. So tell me, what fuels the culture in your community? Who has a story that must be heard? Consider bringing SaskScapes to your part of the province. Email us at saskapes@gmail.com or find us on Facebook. Please share your thoughts on this episode or any of the episodes by writing a review in the iTunes Store or Google Play. Your star ratings help our audience grow. Remember, our stories are our legacy. Now, somewhere around the world for years to come, stories like those found in SaskScapes are being heard. Think about it. We're creating an oral archive so that who we are in this province is never forgotten. I'm Kevin Power. Join me again next time.